For the exchange, you want to bring in the co-founder of Ukraine's Children's Action Project. You have been seeing some of the video posted by the nonprofit group now. Dr. Irwin Redlener is also a professor of pediatrics at the Albert Einstein College of Medicine in New York, and he joins us live from Lviv, Ukraine. Dr. Redlener, thank you so much for joining us and being so flexible, because we had set this aside as a standalone topic to discuss, obviously, an urgent situation there as we've been covering the war now for 2.5 years. Specifically, though, its impact on children. Apologies for the scramble surrounding the president's press conference, but I know there were a number of issues that he touched on that you would like to address. One relates to the war. He says what most would agree with, that the war should come to an end. It's just how this war actually comes to an end and the give and take that these negotiations will have to include from both Vladimir Putin and President Zelensky, that I think a lot of people take issue with. So feel free to weigh in on that. And also, as a pediatrician, when you hear the president raise concerns or skepticism about vaccine mandates, specifically as it relates to schools, where would you like to begin?
Well, why don't we start with Ukraine, since I'm sitting here right now in Lviv and just spent the day and yesterday and really over the weekend meeting with children and families from Ukraine, some of whom are out of Ukraine and living in Poland, and some are right here in Ukraine itself. And first of all, this is a very, very crucial time for Ukraine. Ukraine is one of the growing, strongest economies in Europe. It's an ally of the United States. The full-scale invasion by Russia in February of 2022 has disrupted the lives and the normalcy of children and families for the entire country of Ukraine. About 2/3 of the children of Ukraine have actually been displaced by the war, either out of the country entirely or displaced from the eastern battlefront areas to safer areas in western Ukraine. The problem is, though, that many of these children have not been going to school regularly. There's been a significant amount of psychological trauma. And not only that, obviously, there has been almost 2,000 children who have been killed. Many have been injured. There's children being kidnapped as we speak back to Russia. So Ukraine has been highly traumatized. And of course, like in every other war, it's the children that are taking the brunt of the violence, of the aggression, of the issues that they had no say in. They're just suffering the results from. So we're hoping that this war will come to an end, if nothing else, on behalf of Ukraine's children. And they're looking for their future, and we think they will have one, but we got to get this war stopped.
Yeah, and a point you and others make is, highlighting what President Zelensky says, and that is the need for a just end to the war, where Ukraine can remain independent and have sovereignty over whatever territory they ultimately end up agreeing to, and start to rebuild their country without the lingering threat of Vladimir Putin once again reinvading the country sometime later. So many Ukrainians have left the country, has children. They've started schools in other countries now there in Europe that have graciously taken them in. They've started learning the local language there. And while that is commendable and a good alternative to living within a war zone itself, repatriating these people is a key initiative for Ukraine post-war, and that is very difficult for many of these families to have to then once again uproot their children and bring them back to Ukraine. But it is crucial for the country to survive successfully.
Totally. And, listen, children, this is not a cliche. Children are literally the future of Ukraine. Unfortunately, the battleground areas in eastern and southern Ukraine are where many of the families, Ukrainian families, left, and they went to other countries. And so even if the war ended tomorrow, it would be very difficult for a lot of those families to go back. They can't go back to where they came from. In many cases, the communities have been destroyed. Many are under Russian occupation, and many of them will fall to Russia in a negotiated settlement. And that itself is very anxiety producing for almost everybody we speak to here in Ukraine, because people are worried that if there's a ceasefire, Russia will just use that time to rebuild its military So that this is not something I learned in my pediatric training, but the fact of the matter is that for Ukraine, it is essential that they have security agreements, either joining NATO or having other security arrangements, so they will not continue to be threatened by Russia. So it's a very complicated situation, but as you rightly point out, it is critical those kids come back. But if they've been learning Polish history and Polish language or German culture for the last 3 years, their connection to Ukraine, their Ukrainian identity, will eventually dissipate, and that is really bad for Ukraine and the future of this country.
Can I ask you quickly just to weigh in as a pediatrician, but also as one who's there treating children in Ukraine? We've covered war zones and its impact on children in Gaza as well, and administering vaccines. The fact that there is still an ongoing debate about the efficacy of vaccines that have proven to be extremely efficient, nearly eradicating disease here in the U.S., what do you make of that? And do you support vaccine mandates for school children?
Yes, of course. This is not an issue that's even debatable anymore. One of the more shocking things about this last few years has been the incredible misinformation that has been spread, obviously on social media, but by presidential candidates. This is proven science. This is reality. First of all, no childhood vaccine, no vaccine at all, creates autism. That has been disproven over and over and over again. And that connection is made up, it's fantasy, it's anti-science. But the other thing is that if we leave vaccines, like for mumps, measles, rubella, and polio, up to parents, that creates a problem, because if 15, 20% of the kids in your child's class are not vaccinated, that'll make your children liable to catch these terrible diseases that have been essentially eradicated. So this is about public health. You break your leg, you don't want to get it treated. I'm sorry to hear that, but you'll live with that. But if you don't get vaccinated, you're not just endangering yourself or your child, you're endangering my children. And I think that's fair, and that's the reason we have rules about public health. Vaccines are critical. They represent some of the greatest advances in medicine ever. And the idea that we're even talking about going backwards is astounding and distressing.
Dr. Irwin Redlener, we'll have to leave it there. Thank you so much for the time and for the work that you continue to do for the children in Ukraine. Appreciate it.